Okay.
So thank you very much for your talk. I've done a lot of reading on various educational philosophies, and I really like the Montessori philosophy. Yeah. But as a homeschooling mum, I found myself veering more towards Charlotte Mason because I find it easier to implement in the home.
Sure.
With various. Well, I've got a younger child who's 2. And leaving trays out of this and that for the older ones would generally get destroyed with him around. I can do the practical life aspects, but many of the other things I find very difficult. So I've been just allowing them to have lots of free play outside and hoping that that's meeting their overall need for sensory stimulation. How would you suggest to go about implementing Montessori in the home, or would you suggest that?
That's interesting. There are ways of doing. You can't do pure Montessori in the home, I don't think, and it depends on how many children you have as well and at which stages. First of all, it's not necessary to have lots of materials. And a lot of the materials that there are there, which are very expensive, that are made for classrooms, you could certainly make a homemade version of that. And there are groups of Montessori home groups where they're how to make materials, there's information on that and how to deal with that. I think it's important to realize now, we've been speaking until now about the 7-year cycle, and it's an interesting thing. Maria Montessori, acknowledges 6-year cycle, and her education is based on 6 years, 3 to 6. The first 6 years is being 1 early years, and then 6 to 12 being the elementary, and then 12 to 18 being another stage, and then actually she goes up to 24 in the sense of that's the time that a young person becomes a specialist. They go from their broad general education to becoming, to learning more of a specialization and becoming an expert in something. When I investigated this in terms of Islamic philosophy and different writers, I think that we're looking at boys having a 7-year cycle and girls having a 6-year cycle. And if you compare girls and boys at different ages, we know that girls develop more quickly. And this is one of the reasons why I felt like the Steiner method insists very sort of rigidly on specific ages, and that oftentimes the actual child that we're observing has lost their teeth at 5 years old and is absolutely and perfectly ready to read by 5 years old, and is oftentimes a girl. Okay? And so that rather than imposing an idea on a group of children, that you observe the actual child and see their actual readiness, and then just go with the flow, because every child is different. So, I think it's been shown, and maybe Sally will be able to say, I think that the girl at 3 is equivalent roughly to the boy at 4. Developmentally. And so basing something rigidly on years is not going to work for a lot of children. Okay? Now, in terms of getting back to your question, so there's this period of time when they're young, when they like to do a lot of play on their own, parallel play when they're quite young. They're not really ready to do lots of socializing. And then there's this period, though, when they get 6+ where they really do want to socialize. And so at Manara, we've had about a third of the children that have come to us have been from a purely home ed background. And I did find, and I have to say, and also with my child development background, I did find that a lot of those children were disadvantaged socially. And I'm not going to say that's intrinsic to home education specifically, but the way that Muslims were doing it was that their wives were isolated at home, not able to go out, feeling burdened with the care of maybe multiple generations, and sometimes you had husbands not very keen on them going out and mixing in these various groups, and so de facto the child was at home with on their own with their mother and not getting out as much as they should be. And that parents also not understanding that the child needs that unsupervised, free, outdoor play. And so if you're in a flat, okay, and every time you go out, you got to put all these clothes on, and you got to go out, but you have to cook all those curries at the end of the day, so you're not going to have time. So you have logistical problems in getting your child outside. So I would advise you. One of the best things you can do if you just have a few children, or if you find it difficult because you've got lots of responsibilities, you get yourself a house that has a good-sized garden and put all kinds of play equipment outside your back door, and let your child just get on with making their dens and playing outside as much as possible, climbing and running and whatever, if you can make space for them, and then get them with other children. So if you had a couple of home ed families, 2 or 3 families together, and everyone takes different responsibility for different aspects, and they have a regular group, that they're seeing several times a week for a period of time, 2 or 3 hours, then the child is getting settled. And then you can do your more Montessori education, it'll be more authentic, because the child needs social development. And they need not to be isolated just with their own children at home. And you could say, well, okay, it's true that maybe the local school has a bad influence in a way or something, you're worried about it, but the child is not developing socially as they ought to be if they're isolated. They must learn how to get on with other people. It's very, very important. And I think that the benefits you get, sometimes people are talking to me about, oh, well, I can immerse them in Arabic, or they're academically very advanced, or all these things. That actually does not outweigh the problem of being behind in social development. So you have to really look at your whole child in all aspects and make sure that you can actually provide, a full developmental experience for your child. And it doesn't mean bringing them to, football one day and bringing them to swimming another day, because they are not playing at football and swimming. They're just playing football and they're just swimming. Yeah? They're not playing like making forts, and they're not, you be the father and I'll be the mother and whatever. They're not playing like that. So I do think this is something that people have to be aware of, because you could have a child who really cannot get along with other people, doesn't have the resilience that Sue was talking about, doesn't feel confident dealing with the rest of the world, and knows lots of maths. Mostly, if they're Asian, they know maths. Okay, so.
Yes.
I had a question about what your view was on kind of, the Scandinavian model, going from subject-based learning to topic-based learning for children. So this idea that you, would pick a topic and explore it through multi-disciplines, just to give kind of a child a full sense of what, a single issue involves. Do you have any kind of preference for?
Well, I think that there's the issue. Integrated curriculum is very important, and I have worked on different, making different curriculum sort of packages for use. Integrated curriculum, to see the connections between things is very important. But if you do it to too great an extent, there's a danger that you lose the integrity of the subject. The child has got missing holes. He's got holes missing. Subject knowledge is missing. So I think with maths, you want a progression. You don't want them missing big chunks of information. So you need to have a structured maths program. And with science, you want them to know certain things. With English, it's quite important that there's a development. They understand all of the phonemes. They can read all of the sounds, and so with that, and with writing as well, there's a progression, right? But with a lot of scientific topics, geography, with history, there's a lot of scope for pulling in the different subject areas. Yeah. So I would, if you're doing home education, for instance, you do morning, just like a bit of a structured approach to the literacy and numeracy aspect of things, and then everything else can be topic based. But you still want them to know the scientific method, not just to know random bits of science. Yeah.
So a mix, ideally, or?
Yeah. The thing is, they have to have enough of a subject in a sensible way.
Okay.
And then pull things together. So that's a lot of times where the project work comes in, but then giving the child a choice of projects. Sure. And with the Montessori Great Lessons, the first lesson is the story of the universe, and that's when you get astronomy, and you get tectonic plates, and you get geography, and the formation of volcanoes, and all that. And then you have the coming of life, and then you're talking about classification of animals, and you can talk about animals. And then you have the coming of humans, and you can talk about archaeology and anthropology and early civilizations. You've got the story of maths, and numbers, and counting, and money, and measurements, and everything. And then you've got the story of writing and communications. Yeah. So all of those stories told as narratives with timelines, interactive timelines, they lend themselves to all kinds of project work. Yeah. Okay.
Question over here? Yes.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Just a question about the grounding that a kid might get if he's been Montessori schooled at primary level, and then when he switches to say 11 plus, and he decide to go for a secondary normal route of education, or decide to homeschool, what are some of the pitfalls that are worth being aware about at that point?
Well, we've had several of our children, make a transition. We had children from the ages of 5 to 16. Now, our secondary program became more traditional, but we still, enable them to have choices where possible. Okay, and to do group work where possible. But it was more geared, especially from sort of 13 plus, towards just getting GCSEs, but we have had children make quite a good transition and get even scholarships and partial scholarships to grammar schools, feeling very confident, very able. So I would say, our program, which is a flexi-schooling program, which is part-time, was especially suited for children who were quite able. I mean, everyone did well, and all the children did well. If they were average or above, we took them because we had fewer hours. We were just doing between 16 and 20 hours a week. But if the child was sort of average ability or above, they could get all of their education in their 16, to 20 hours, except for any specific things they wanted to choose for arts and crafts or PE, which was kind of after-school activities. We've not had problems with children moving into other schools. We've had children who have come out of other schools where they felt they were bullied, they felt the teachers weren't paying attention to them, they were unhappy at school, and through being in our classrooms, the children were able to gain the confidence that when they did go back to another school system, they felt better about themselves and they felt able to cope, in their social environment. So till now, I haven't heard from a parent who said, we've had difficulty now the child's gone somewhere else.
Just in terms of academically, if they're at different levels, does that not sometimes present any issues as well? Say, an 11-year-old, if he's been in primary school, might be at a different level of mathematics or something, whereas Montessori, because he's been developing his own rate of learning.
I mean, the problem that we come up with the children who are very able, if they're not just sort of 1 year ahead, but if they're like 2 or 3 years ahead, the problem then becomes that they get bored going into the other school system because the school system is not allowing for high ability children to do something more interesting. But that's actually a problem of the school system because in this country, the children with special needs and who are lower ability are well catered for. The children who are higher ability, there's this sort of feeling that they should be able to just get on with their work and so it's easy for them, so what's the problem? And that does actually lead to problems, but that's another aspect of the system which I think that people should fight for changing. Yeah. But you might be able to get a school to agree to flexi-schooling in the terms of only going a few days to the school and then doing other things at home which were more advanced, or simultaneous enrollment with the college or something like that. I mean, a child can do an open university degree, at a young age if they wanted to start on that route. If they take several GCSE or Cs at sort of the age of 13 or 14, they could go straight to a university. I wouldn't say it's ideal, but if they're really bored at school, that would be a possibility. Yeah.
Can you speak about how to integrate a Montessori primary education model with the Islamic traditional education model, so around 7, where both you would introduce them to Quran studies or fiqh, but in this
What we had was, we had a morning madrasa, and I'm very keen on the morning madrasa idea, so the first hour or two of the day would be given to those activities that normally are left to the end of the day when the child is most tired. So I felt like you can get twice as much in the same amount of time if they start out fresh in the morning, and then that would be followed by a period of, say, a 3-hour work cycle, something like that, where they do their academic work, and then a break for lunch, and then the PE, arts and crafts, sort of more hands-on things in the afternoon. So that's my idea of the ideal cycle, is you start with the sacred knowledge in the morning, first thing, fresh, and then they go to the academic learning, and then they go to their projects or their other things. Obviously, you have to have breaks, and they can do some physical exercise in the morning as well, but that's the kind of division of the day I think is most ideal, the rhythm of learning. And children really respond to rhythm and structure, a kind of comfortable structure. So the child, when they know the boundaries and they know what's expected of them, and it's quite clear, then I think they make a lot of progress that way. They need that. Sometimes you get home educators that are very free flow, and they're not having high enough expectations of the children, and they're not quite sure what to do with them, and so the child doesn't make the same kind of progress they could. So I've had children, even children of teachers from a few families, whose children, when they came in, made about 2 or 3 years of progress in 1 year because of just that atmosphere and that structure. Yeah.
Can I just have a follow-up question? Sorry, I'm here still.
Sorry.
You may have alluded to, at some points, there being not necessarily mismatches or points where the Montessori education and the Islamic philosophy don't necessarily meet. Could you talk about that?
Right. Well, I think if you read some of the writings of Maria Montessori, you would almost get the impression that the teacher is not important. that the teacher looks undervalued in comparison to the Islamic tradition. So that there's one little area of conflict. And I think that she was just maybe trying to, in maybe some of a dramatic way, and thinking about the time and place, her social situation at the time, teachers were very, very authoritarian. And so she was trying to get them, I think, out of that way of thinking. But certainly a child in a Montessori school would be expected to respect the teacher. But the teacher wouldn't be kind of imposing, it wouldn't be a very imposing figure, but very approachable figure. And that's the kind of teacher that a child of that age needs. And the teacher that's very formal and very imposing needs to probably teach older, young people, right? It's not the right kind of teacher for that age, I think. Yeah. There's also the issue maybe of needing lots of things. And personally, I like to have this simple, not needing too many things. So then you think, why are all of these objects necessary? It looks materialistic. It could, from a point of view, look materialistic. Why do I have to accumulate these thousands of pounds of stuff? But you don't have to. But there's a certain element, so it's the philosophy that she's just found that if children work with these things, they will make this progress and it will be easy. But you can also make different things at home. There's certainly Montessori schools in Africa that work with, nuts and, little objects and things. And they've not got all this Neen House, Montessori material that costs X thousands or anything. So, and there's a group. There's a lady who does, I think, Montessori in a tackle box, where she figures out, there's a fishing tackle box, and you can put everything in little, stack them and put them away nicely, and they're not going to take over your house. So that, but sometimes things look, in a particular classroom, look very Western, and I think it's important to understand that Maria Montessori lived in different parts of the world. She stayed in India for a period of time, and she felt that whatever the practical life things were, or the cultural things, it should prepare the child for their own culture. So there wasn't an imposition of a particular kind of a culture. There's no, for instance, fairy gnomes that the children have to learn about, or whatever it is. So there's, you can have a Montessori, but Montessori is very neutral. So you can have a very Jewish Montessori school, and you can have a very Catholic Montessori school, and a very Muslim one, and you can have a very, atheistic, humanistic Montessori school, and it doesn't make any difference. The method will work with any kind of educational philosophy, any kind of personal philosophy, and I think that's another advantage of it. Steiner, I think he was a genius. He had lots of interesting things to say about education, but anthroposophy as a philosophy is really not compatible with Islam. And he also had some ideas which maybe Steiner people will say, well, he was a product of his time, about race and color and about incarnation of souls. And according to this worldview, people started out in the black races, and they kept on being reincarnated, and they eventually ended up blonde and blue-eyed, and so that, in the end, a person, everyone's soul journey will end up, they'll be born as a blonde and blue-eyed person, and then everything will be fine. Well, this is really incompatible with Islamic philosophy. And it's true that if you can do a Steiner teacher training, you won't have to believe that, but because the central sort of, the college, or I forget what it's called, the people who are in charge, there will be some people who do believe, the whole religious and philosophy, or this philosophy, that he was an avatar or whatever it was that they consider him to be. And so, that is going to affect this school, and that's why I say that Muslim schools, I don't think you can set up a Muslim school that's a Steiner school, because you'll end up with those problems eventually. Yeah. Whereas, you could use some nice ideas from Steiner and incorporate them, like children making their own books and things like that. There's things that you can incorporate from Charlotte Mason. Living books is very important, and that also goes together with the classical idea of introducing children to the great classics of the world. So there's lots of things that you can do in that Montessori structure, which will still be a Montessori school, but you can still do them. Yeah, you can do eurythmy. I think you can do patterns of drawing. But there's nothing inhibiting you from doing that. You could just as easily set that up in Montessori as you could do it somewhere else.
There's one more question. Yep.
If you didn't have access to any of these schools, and I take it you have children?
I do have children.
What advice would you give to parents? I don't know, some pointers, maybe 4 or 5 things that they must do in terms of upbringing their children, so that we can take these with us today.
Oh my. Well, I'm preparing for a talk about it. It's going to be a Muslim education conference in London. I'm going to be preparing for that at the end of April to see if I can, bring it down to that few things you can start doing on Monday, idea. I think observing your child is extremely important. And that should be something that parents have the instinct to do, especially mothers. And I think that what I've found is a lot of times young mothers are made to feel like their instincts are not correct. And they're given lots of advice from various books. And they're told that they should do this or that from such and such a culture or from their in-laws or whatever it is. And that as a result of not trusting their own observations of their own children, they become not good at observing their children. And I think that, if the child is born, if you can have a natural childbirth, and if you can have breastfeeding, and you can have connections between the mother and the child, so the child is very in tune with the mother, and the mother is very in tune with the child, you have a good start, and you're going to have, the child has to sleep properly, they have to have good food, and they have to have time to rest and reflect, and they have to be outside in nature. So these are things which are very important to any the development of any child. Have good books in your house. Buy a lot of good books, fiction, nonfiction, biographies, reference books. There's been studies that show that children that grew up in houses with 300 or more books tend to be on average 2 years above their peers, regardless of what country they live in. So read with the child. One of the most beneficial things I've found is that we have family reading, and we have family reading right through GCSE. We read Dickens, we read Tolkien, we read everything. We listen to Radio 4 News, and we talk about politics, we talk about the world. So we have discussions. So we talk about topics of interest, not just giving orders. If you're in a situation where you've got like 6 children or 7 children, and you feel frantic, and you're just spending most of your day chasing after them, and and telling them to pick up their dirty socks and things like that, then something's gone wrong. So we have to have that kind of calm in the house. We have an order in the house. There's a place for everything, and then it's pleasant, and people are enjoying each other's company, and then we have a nice family dinner together. We talk about something pleasant over the dinner, and everyone takes a turn in talking. So these are the things, this is the parenting that everyone has to do. We go out as a family to museums or on outings, or we listen to speakers, and we learn how to sit still when the speaker's speaking, and we go to visit other people's houses. We don't put our hands in the drawers and take everything out, but we sit nicely and we ask permission. So this is just general child rearing. But these things are important. Being attuned to your child is very important. Exposing them to things that they're interested in. If they are interested in the workings of the Porsche engine, get them books on the workings of the Porsche engine. It doesn't matter if they don't understand half the words on the page, because they will just sit and look at it, and they'll gradually absorb it, and before you know, they'll be the expert telling you all about it. And did you know that there was terminal velocity, and did you know that there was things like this, because they just discovered it. Yeah. Let them make a little bit of a mess. Give them an area where they can make a mess and keep their messes, sort of creative messes, going. Yeah, I have mothers that just want to tidy up everything all the time, and everything. You can't have a grown child when everything's tidy all the time. Right, okay.
One thing I was going to ask very quickly, is there any now political difficulties for the Montessori movement, either in the UK or in Europe? Because there have been for other particularly in Europe, but it has, of course, a different view of the state and the individual to what we have in the UK and the States. There's been difficulty with other movements. Well,
Maria Montessori had her schools closed down in Germany and in Italy in the time of the fascist and Nazi movement.
No, I mean now.
Amsterdam. EU. Well, in the Netherlands, because she died in the Netherlands. She lived in the Netherlands for a period of time, and the Netherlands, which I love that system of education. I lived there for 5 years. But at the time that I lived there, that was in the 90s, if there were any group of 200 children that wanted, of parents of 200 children that wanted any kind of education, they had the right to demand a school, and they could just sign a petition and say, we want a Steiner school, we want a Montessori school, and that would be paid for by the state, because that was what parental choice of education meant, that you could just literally choose, if there was enough of you, what kind of school you wanted. And so I visited Montessori schools in the Netherlands that are very well funded, and so they have equal funding in schools, and their whole approach to society is that everyone has equal rights, and there is a democratic process going there. In England, when people to a large extent, when people are making private schools, independent schools, they tend to want to recreate a very traditional, conservative grammar school. And so it's less common that you'll find And I'm not sure if that has to do with the politicians and the leading figures of society having gone to those kind of schools.
There's no rising political pressure against a Montessori philosophy in education.
I think the main thing that gets in people's way is that they just haven't got, for instance, the funding for it, but also that the people who have the money to pay for a nice private education want a very traditional kind of grammar school, so that it's just maybe less popular and because of the culture itself. But in America that's not the case. In other countries it's not the case. It depends on the nature of the people. But the people who have money to pay to fork out, for a more impressive education want that big grand building, and those facilities, and they want everything that goes with that, and they want it to look very sort of organized. And I think that's something about the English culture. I could be wrong about that. It's not going to look like Californian schools. That's all I can say. I mean,
but you still have a head boy and a head girl at a Montessori school.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you very much again. There's time for some closing remarks. Would anybody like to make any comment about the day as a whole, and make any comment about the implications of it? Yes? No, not you. Right. No, well, I think it's been a wonderful day. I've been aware of these issues for a very long time, including my own 6 children. But this is the first time that we've had to my knowledge, a conference, a meeting, particularly within the Islamic community, which has brought some really top people together, that has been able to demonstrate the toxicity of the current educational system, which is moving more and more that way. I mean, I had the benefit of being educated in the 50s, and at primary school, actually, Montessori ideas were more or less, to some degree, had come into primary education. So there was project work, and I wasn't taught to any attempt to make me learn to read till I was at least 6. And mothers were at home looking after their children and so on. So it's happened progressively, hasn't it? So we've had speakers that have illustrated that very clearly. And the way that the things that we should be paying attention to in how to bring up sort of rounded children. And I come back to the concept of fitra. The importance of fitra and understand the nature of the child in general and its developmental needs, but also the particular fitra of each child, the particular nature of it. And this is something we can unpack, and Ghazali deals with it, that what is within the child to begin with and how you bring it out. And all this was there in traditional Islamic education. To some degree, of course, it has influenced English education through Spain and through the academies in Egypt in the Middle Ages. But so we've had the illustration, the examples of how toxic the present education environment is for our children, and then we've also had with Fatima an example of doing something about it. And that's also a rarity. Actually, do something about it. So I hope that you'll all go back with a sort of better understanding of what's going on with children's education, and with some idea of what we can do about it and to develop what's already there. So thank you very much indeed for the 3 speakers, and thank you all very much for coming. There'll be, I think we're open till 5. There's some more Montessori classes going on at the back, and those speakers that remain, they can, I'm sure, be open to conversations and comment. So, alhamdulillah, thank you very much.